Great. Thanks all for joining today. So I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, and it's great to be with you all today. I will start off with a little bit of the story of how we got to where we are right now, as we said, through that kind of this intersection of education and artificial intelligence. And then I'll share a little bit of what we're doing and how we are thinking through things. To give you a little background on me, I have a PhD in educational psychology. I am not a technologist. One of the really cool things about this new technology is that I can tell it how to act in plain language, and I don't have to code it. But I have spent most of my career building digital learning environments and thinking about how we can build in what we know from research about how people learn into online experiences that help students succeed. And I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy, and that means I lead our content team, our product management team, our design team, and our community support team. But I do that very much from a learning lens, as opposed to maybe a traditional product, like Chief Product Officer kind of lens, if you're familiar with that role. I don't have a lot of that background, I have much more of the learning background. I worked for a couple years here in Arizona as a school psychologist in a school with 1,300 kindergarten through third graders, if you can imagine that many little people all in one school. And then after that, moved to work with the Cisco networking academies, and then with Pearson, the big international publisher, and 3.5 years ago, made the move to Khan Academy. And in the summer, in August of 2022, so not this past August, one before that, Sal and I got a note from Sam Altman and Greg Brockman, and they said, hey, we have been training this new model, but Bill Gates says not to come back to him about it until it can pass advanced placement biology. We need some more advanced placement biology questions to test it on and to work through. And we know that you all at Khan Academy have a whole lot of AP biology questions. Would you be willing to share those with us and talk about how we might be able to use this new large language model in education? And we said, well, you know, our questions and answers at Khan Academy are free. They're available. We'll package them up for you and send them on over. Why don't you get back in touch with us when you've got this trained? Sal has kind of seen GPT-3, and we thought, well, it's fine. It's not quite ready for prime time yet. So they call us back in early September and say, so we're done training this new model. Would you like to see it? We said, well, sure. And so they gave us, Sal and I, access to what we now know as of GPT-4 in September of 2022 through a Slack bot. So Sal and I could chat with GPT-4 on a Slack bot. And we spent the weekend just doing all kinds of things you can imagine, all the things you did when you first saw like ChatGPT. We were doing all of that. Sal wrote a poem to his wife, you know, all these kinds of things. But we really very quickly were like, well, it's great at answering questions, but what we would like to do is not just be a question answer, but could it be a tutor? And what would that look like if we, instead of just answering the questions, it was asking the student questions and leading them through understanding and solving problems and figuring out what that might look like. And so they quickly gave us our first lesson in prompt engineering, which was 3 sentences that basically said, you were a Socratic tutor. I am a student trying to learn this new subject. Don't give me the answer, but ask me questions to help me discover it myself. And, you know, we learned how to basically just put that in and how that changed the model behavior. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. We were under this super strict NDA, so we couldn't talk to anyone about this. We convinced OpenAI to let 20 more internal people have access. And we did a hackathon for a week where we said, let's see like all the things this could be. We'll build little prototypes and see where things are. And that was the end of September. And after that, we took our roadmap for the year of all the things we were going to build, and basically threw it away. And we said, all right, GPT-4 is going to launch March 14th. And we are at that same time are going to launch what we now call Khanmigo, which is a tutor for students and an assistant for teachers. And so spent the next 6 months building that and getting ready to launch it. We were still some of the funny parts of this. So for example, when ChatGPT came out in November, we were still under this strict NDA. Like we couldn't talk about the fact that we had seen GPT-4 and we're working on something with it. So everyone wanted to interview, Sal about what do you think about GPT-4? And we had to just say, oh yeah, that's interesting. That looks like it could be something, So anyway, that said, we ended up launching Cognigo, and I will talk a little bit about some of the foundations of learning behind it, and then do a little bit of sharing of what it looks like and some of the things that we've launched more recently with it as well. So that said, let me share my screen here. So in the world of education, we have been looking for ways to use technology to teach for a long time. This is a contraption built by someone named Sidney Pressey in Ohio in 1925. And how this worked is that roller, you would put a list of questions in it, a kind of a rolling paper filled with multiple choice questions. And the student could read the question, and then those levers on the right, they would select which answer they wanted, and it would give them feedback of whether it was right or wrong. And here's the best thing. In the back, you could set a number of how many questions you had to get right in a row. And if you got that many questions, that chute out the front would dispense candy. Like, come on, don't you want to hook that up to your laptop now? So this is an example just of how we have been thinking about, we know students need practice. We know that students need to get lots of practice to learn a number of skills, especially in math. How can we get them practice with immediate feedback for what they need? And we've been working on this since 1925. We're coming up on 100 years now of thinking about technology building this. But you may notice we don't have one of these in every classroom. So there's lots more to learning than looking at some multiple choice questions, selecting an answer and getting a reward, obviously. But there's some things that we can learn from this, and that we've learned about how people learn, that as we got access to the new artificial intelligence large language models, we said, could this help solve any of the problems that we've been trying to solve? And so just to review what some of that looks like, starting from a learning perspective as opposed from starting with the technology. So starting with, what do we know about learning? We know that students learn more when they're actively engaged with the material. And this doesn't mean like actively doing something, it means cognitively engaged. Your brain is actively engaged. You're thinking about, how does this connect to other things I know? You're putting it in your own words. You're doing all of those kinds of interactions with the ideas. Those are what helps build those neurons, create those connections in your brain, help you move things into long-term memory. All of that's important, that active cognitive engagement. And one of the big challenges in schools is to get 30 kids in a classroom cognitively engaged in new material that they're working on. We also know that working on material that's just at the edge of what you can do is really important for learning. If you work on material that you can do without any help, it's sometimes good to practice that to keep it fresh in your memory, but you're probably not learning something new when it's that easy. And if it's too hard, you're going to end up frustrated and people just give up. You want something that you can do with just a little bit of support. And again, in a classroom of 30 students, how do you provide all of them that little bit of support they need to learn new things and to be successful when you're one teacher working around to all those students? Third, we know immediate feedback is important. So we certainly saw that candy way back then. We figured out immediate feedback. We certainly at Khan Academy have been able to give immediate feedback on answers, on kind of final answers, since Sal started coding a platform way back in 2010. But what we haven't been able to do is really have a conversation about it. Be able to say, tell me how you got to that answer. be able to say, oh, you're getting off track right there, right when you made that choice, or figure out, was that just a simple math error in there, or did you have a misconception about this? So that idea of being able to give feedback in the moment is really important. And finally, seeing value in what they can do is really important. So one of the questions we probably get most from teachers is, how can I motivate my students? And what we see is that in research, there's a kind of a simple theory actually called expectancy value. And it says you're more likely to do things, one, when you expect to be successful at them. So, who wants to do things that they think, I'm never going to be successful at this? So that idea of expecting to be successful. And second, that you see value in it. So why do I want to do this? Now, there's lots of ways that people can see value. They can see value because it's relevant to something that they want to do in their lives, to a job, to a hobby. They can see value because if their friends are doing it. They can see value because you get points for doing it. So lots of ways we can build value, but certainly seeing some of the connections to what you're doing. Almost every teacher sometime has probably been asked, why do we need to learn this? So it's interesting, and you'll see we've played around a little bit with how we can use some of the generative AI to help students answer that question in what they do. So as we started building Conmigo, we started thinking about these problems and these issues, how we know about how students learn, and can we make these things happen more in classrooms, and started designing Khan Academy Conmigo based on that. The other piece of research that we built on is this framework that Mickey Chi and Ruth Wiley, who are at Arizona State, created. They call it the ICAP framework. And basically it says that as you move in terms of interactions from passive, so just watching something, even just watching one of Sal's great videos, it still is only increasing your learning by a certain amount. And you will get more engagement if you are actively doing something, even if that's, say, highlighting a text or pausing a video or moving forward. Again, it's getting to that cognitive engagement. You'll learn even more if you're generating or producing something. So whether that's producing the answer to the math problem or explaining something in your own words. And they found in their research that the greatest learning occurs when a learner engages in a dialogue where both sides are producing something. So whether that's, the tutor and the learner co-writing a story together, debating each other, whatever that looks like, that interaction can be even more important for learning and where things are. And this is another place where on digital platforms, we've never really been able to do that. And so the new technology has the potential for us to think about how can we get students interacting more and being able to then increase their learning outcomes. So with that, let me escape out of here and share a little bit of what Conmigo looks like. So there's a number of YouTube videos out there with Sal doing some demos and working through, but I'm going to do a little explanation of some things that are happening under the hood as we go, as you can kind of see what's going on here. So these are all the courses on Khan Academy right now. Algebra is actually our most commonly used course. So that is the one that gets the most traffic. We get across all our courses, we have about 10 million students a month. About 1 million of those spend at least 2 hours during the month, which we know is what we call efficacious usage. So we know if you get to 2 hours a month, you're likely to see the increases in achievement that we're really looking for. But lots of students just come to watch one video that helps them get their homework done, and that is all fine too. So we have multiple ways of using Khan Academy. But let's say we are looking to practice these equations with variables on both sides. So this is what regular Khan Academy looks like. We have the videos, the articles, and the exercises. So Conmigo in companion mode, what we call companion mode, lives over here on the side, and Conmigo can talk to you when you're watching a video, when you're reading an article, or when you're doing an exercise. So I'll pop up Conmigo here. And Conmigo says, I'm here to help with this exercise. Here are some things you can ask me. Help me solve this. Try a similar example. Why should I care about learning this? Or you can just type in, I'm going to just say I'm stuck. So what happens here when I type in I'm stuck is we first send, what's happening is we are sending to GPT-4 through an API the messages that the student types. We're also sending our tutor prompt, in this case, our exercise prompt. And so that's about 500 words that I told you those 3 sentences we started with. We've done a lot of work since then. And that prompt really then tells the model how to act like a tutor. And so what we did was we took the research on human tutoring, and there's a lot of folks out there. Art Gracer from the University of Memphis is one of the ones we have used a lot of research from, because he did a lot of work trying to develop dialogue-based tutors really since like the late 90s. And so he was doing a lot of work writing dialogue trees and using natural language processing. And the technology just wasn't quite there. And he retired a couple of years ago. And I'm like, oh, and here's the technology you've been waiting for. But his research contains a lot of ideas about what good humans do, very specifically, like what are the moves a tutor makes at given times. And so you can even ask, if you ask GPT-4, tell me the tutor moves recommended in Gracer, Person, and Magliano, it will then say, here are the moves that it recommends. So we can, for example, say, use the moves that are in that research paper. And so we send this prompt that's full of these instructions of how to act like a tutor. And it also says things like, don't give the student the answer. It turns out when we were starting this work, the model really wants to return the answer to the student. And it was like pulling teeth. We started doing things like, if you write in all caps in the prompt, it's like yelling at it. You say, do not give the student the answer. And it helped. It gave the student the answer less often. We were all doing prompt engineering. We were all trying to figure out how this works. At one point, Sal wrote in a sentence in this, the fate of the world depends on not giving the student the answer. And it helped. It gave the answer less. So lots of kind of just exploration of how to make it act like a tutor. The other thing that we do is we feed it the problem. So we give it in the prompt, here's the problem the student's working on. We also give it the answer to this problem, because we know the answer. Humans wrote this question and the answer's in our database. And we give it the hints. So if you're stuck on this problem, you can ask for hints. And those hints also all get sent in with the prompt. So we send all of that because, of course, these models hallucinate and make things up, and they're not meant to be great at math. So one way we increase their accuracy is by giving it the answer. Now, it's still not perfect. And there are times, for example, that when I'm a student, we have students sometimes that in their interactions, the answers they give are so wrong that the model thinks it's starting to work on a new problem. They'll be like, oh, okay, let's solve this one. We're like, oh, no, you needed to correct what they were doing. So for those reasons, we also say things like, there we go. So thanks for whoever muted that. So that's why we have Conmigo makes mistakes sometimes, and here's why. And we work on increasing the literacy, the AI literacy of students that are participating in our beta and have access to Conmigo right now. So it has replied to me and said, no worries, the goal here is to find the value of R. Do you know the first step to solve this equation? So I'm just gonna say no. And so again, it's going through the API, coming back. That's okay, we should group like terms together. Can you try that? What's a like term? So a couple other things, because we're having students interact directly with the model, there's some things that we did to try to increase the safety and security of the model. So one thing that happens is that you see here, we say this chat is logged. You can view it in your chat history. So I can go back to any chat that I've had with Conmigo, But if I am under 18, my teacher or parent who's linked to my account can also see my chat history. So that's one way that, we let students know that that's happening, but it's another way to kind of bring some of the concerns about academic honesty into play, because students know that their teacher and parents can see whatever they talk to Cognigo about. It's also the case that everything the student sends goes through OpenAI's moderation API, and that API takes we give it a section like the last 3 interactions, so it has a little more context for the conversation, and it rates everything, gives everything a score on violence, hate, self-harm, sexual content, and I think there's 7 things that it gives a score for. And then we've set thresholds that if it's above that threshold, then that conversation, both Cognigo will say, oh, I can't respond to this, it violates our terms and conditions, but it also sends that an email if you're a minor with that conversation to the teacher and or parent, depending on who's linked to the account. So that, again, it's another safety check for students who may be having these things. And what we find is that when people first get access to Cognigo, they want to test those boundaries, and so we see them saying things that are concerning and where they are, but then they pretty much realize, oh, they've got these kind of safety tools in place, we'll use it for academic content. No, it's not perfect, but it helps a lot on cutting things down. The question is where to put those thresholds. For example, we talk about, okay, what about talking about guns? And all right, do we want students to be able to have discussions about the Second Amendment? Probably yes. Do we want students to be able to talk about weaponry used in World War II? Yes. Do we want to flag instances where they're talking about guns using to hurt people? Yes. So how do you get those thresholds right in terms of setting where those are? So that's certainly been one of our challenges and things we've worked on. So this is companion mode. I could keep kind of going and work through this problem, but you get the sense of it. And I'll show you one other piece that we pulled up, which is, apart from companion mode, we've created a bunch of activities that we are testing out, seeing what works for students, seeing what students engage with, what kind of results we get. So certainly we have Tutor Me in math and science and humanities, practice my knowledge on whatever subject. We have a new feature we released 2 weeks ago, which is give me feedback on an academic essay. I'll come back to that one in a minute. Craft a story, brainstorm an admissions essay, check for problems in an admissions essay, debate topics. So if you want to debate middle school topics, you can debate, should schools have longer or shorter days? Should schools start later in the mornings? Should schools have longer summer breaks? So you can, are video games good or bad for kids? And if I say, okay, let's do that one, it will ask which side of the debate you want to take. I'm going to say video games are good for kids. And then it will say, all righty, it's up. You're up first. Here's your first argument. Why do you think video games are good for kids? Let's hear it. Let's see.
And our keyboard is. Yeah,
all right, I think they help develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. A fine point. Video games can be like a tricky puzzle, making our brains work like busy bees. But let's not forget, too much screen time can turn us into couch potatoes. Balance is key, don't you think? Now, what's your next argument? And you go through a couple of different rounds, and it'll, at the end, kind of summarize what the arguments were and give you some suggestions on debating and debate argumentation. We have a couple of games over here on the left where you basically play with words, and some extra things that we've been working on about navigating financial aid, coaching you in your academic career. This last piece on personalizing my interests, one of the things that lots of people talk about with technology and tutors is, hey, can a tutor know some things about me? And so we give students the option, if they'd like, to basically name up to 10 things you're interested in. We then store those, and when you come back and talk to Conmigo, say you're doing a math problem, it will lean on some of those and say, hey, let's talk about this. I'm, an Arizona Diamondbacks fan. So it would say, hey, let's put this in terms of baseball, and let's think about how this might play out with the Diamondbacks when they were in the, in the World Series. So we are starting to think about how to bring in the world of intelligent tutors. We talk about a tutor model, which Conmigo does. It's how does the tutor act? Then you have a student model. What do you know about the student? In our case, we know a lot about what skills they've mastered and haven't mastered yet. But now we're also gathering things like, what might your interests be? We've made this voluntary because we are interested, to use a word, in how people feel about having their interests stored. And we found in initial testing in schools that kids think, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. And teachers think, oh, I'm not sure I wanted to keep my interest, store my interest in where those are. So a little bit of a generational divide there that we've seen on some of this, which is interesting. But we're testing it out at the moment. So that's a piece there and how things go. I'm not logged into the teacher side. For teachers, we have a bunch of other tools. We have a lesson planning tool. We have a tool to help write exit ticket questions. So the questions that teachers give right at the end of class to see if students got the lesson for the day. We have a class snapshot that summarizes the data on Khan Academy for their class, how many skills students have leveled up on, how much time they've spent, etc. And we also have a chat summary. So if their whole class is chatting with Conmigo about various things, they can get a summary of what the student said. So they don't have to read every transcript. They can find out what are the most asked questions, what are the things that students are doing. And that's developed by taking the chat transcripts, the conversations with the students interacting with the AI, and putting those back into the AI and asking for a summary, which kind of starts to get pretty meta, layers on top of layers. So that's a little bit about what we've done. I'll talk just for another minute and then open it up to some questions and thoughts. The other piece, as we talk to a lot of the sorry, wrong share. My brain is thinking share, and I wasn't thinking fully. The other thing that we hear from schools, so we do a lot of talking to teachers and school administrators and such, and certainly lots of concerns. These are just some headlines from earlier in the year that we heard a lot about. The college essay is dead. Everybody is cheating. Educators worry about students using artificial intelligence to cheat, and have been talking a lot about schools and policy and how to set policy around using artificial intelligence in classrooms and what that might look like. And the concern is legitimate. If you took that same problem that I was just trying to solve with Conmigo and just put it into ChatGPT, this is the answer you get. Like, it works through the whole problem and gives you the answer. R is 3. So certainly, if students are just interested in getting to the answer to get it done, these tools are giving them a lot of ways to get answers without actually learning the material and what that is. And so we talk a lot about how do you set policies and have conversations with students to help them understand what is right and what is academic dishonesty, and what are their goals in trying to do these practice problems. Why, to get back to the value, why are learning these things important? And so we often talk to teachers about different options they have in the classroom. So on some assignments, they may explicitly forbid use of this kinds of technology. We certainly don't recommend this as a blanket statement. We saw school districts who were just flat out banning ChatGPT, and that initially, I think, was just a response of until we learned about it. But it's a given that these tools seem to be here and are lots of people are using them in their jobs and in their lives. We think it's better to teach students about them than to just ban them. And so there's some other options. You can think about creating assignments as teachers that are really difficult to complete with these tools. Like ChatGPT doesn't know what you did in class yesterday. So if you are a teacher and thinking about how to make an assignment, if it's related to things very specific to your class, it's going to make it difficult to use these tools. You can talk about completing assignments in class where you can see what students are knowing and doing. You can allow and require acknowledgement. So say having students talk about which parts of an assignment they used these tools to do. And more interestingly, I think, is to have them then reflect on that. So if they are writing, say, an essay and they did a draft and then fed it to ChatGPT and then have to write about, hey, here's what ChatGPT changed and here's how I think about that. And here's why I accepted that change because I thought it was better for reasons X, Y, Z. That's building their metacognitive skills, their own thinking about their thinking. And so that's a place where that actually may be a good potential use. Now, the essay tool that I showed you that we just released, again, has those transcripts attached. So teachers can actually see what work the student did and what work the large language model suggested and where those things come together. But there's lots of these tools out in the world and students need to be able to certainly use ones that are specifically designed for education, but there's also other ones out there and they need to have guidance about how to use those. I'm going to skip through there. And the last piece that I'll talk about is some of the ethics and how we think about ethical use of AI and principles. So we found two things that we have no stake in the ground with these two resources, but found them helpful. The first is the ethical framework for AI in education, which has principles that are what you see on the right here, these 9 key principles. But the framework is really meant for folks that are going to be consumers of artificial intelligence based tools and not developers of them. So we found the artificial intelligence risk management framework to be helpful. It's not education specific for us, but it talks a lot about identifying risk and managing it. So we could think about, for instance, what are the biggest risks? Well, one is the models being inaccurate. So how do we deal with that? So we do things like we give it the answers. We also worked with OpenAI to do a little bit of reinforcement learning to try to improve its math performance. We also tell students that it can be wrong and work on AI literacy education to help them understand they shouldn't just accept the answer, just like they don't accept everything they read on the internet, and how to think about through those things. So we take all of each risk and identify the steps we're going to take to mitigate that risk around each of the areas identified in the ethical framework. And so that's a little bit of how we've approached thinking about safety and responsibility in terms of having students access to these models and what that looks like. So as you can see, we can think about what measures did we take to understand risks and what have we done to mitigate those. The other things we ask to think about a lot is what happens to the records of the interactions that students and teachers have with the model. So we right now have an agreement with OpenAI that any information that gets passed, so first of all, we don't pass any identifying information to the model. We don't tell them who that student is. They get assigned a random identifier that gets passed over. And none of the data that goes into the model is used to train other new versions of OpenAI's models. And that is certainly consistent with our value of privacy, and our districts and schools want to hear that. I will say that that is in tension with another value, which is as we think about wanting models that are unbiased and wanting models that reflect the diversity of the students we interact with, the models would probably be better if we could use some of the student responses to train new models. So our values are in tension with each other. It's very easy for us to list values. We value data privacy. We value having transparent and unbiased models. Great, yes. And those two can conflict with each other. How do we balance those? How do we find a way through to help achieve both of those goals and what that looks like? And I think those are some of the interesting questions about safety and responsibility. All right, so I will stop there and just open it up for questions and comments and thoughts and thinking about our guide as we think about artificial intelligence is how we can use it to augment human intelligence, to help us enhance human intelligence and human potential. And look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start by asking people in the room for questions. Anybody in the room have? Yes.
Yes, I'm very curious how Khan Academy customizes the model so that when I go to Bing, I get a different kind of interaction than when I go to Khan Academy. And she did mention something about like adding bold-faced words to the prompt. That's one way to customize it, but I was wondering if there's other things they do, like change the data set, the training data set, or how customization.
He was asking, are there ways that you, besides putting in all uppercase thing, how have you engineered the prompts? Is that what you're asking?
How have you?
I think I heard him asking me about models too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did not fine tune a model. We did not create our own models. We are using the same GPT-4 model that is publicly available. It's available if you are in OpenAI and using GPT-4, we're using that same model. Everything that we do is all of the different responses you see are the result of prompt engineering. There was, interestingly, an article that came out recently from Microsoft Research. Eric Kovitz, their chief science officer, was posting it if you look for it online. And they compared a fine-tuned model to trying to control the model through prompt engineering and found that controlling the model through prompt engineering yielded equivalent or better results than fine-tuning the model. And I will tell you that for, writing prompts is a lot easier than trying to fine-tune a model where things are. So it is all through that fine-tuning. There are a couple things we do that are a couple of things we do on the prompt engineering, particularly when we get to more complex prompts. So in the essay feedback tool, you can get feedback on organization, evidence to support your argument, the tone of the language, 5 or 6 different things. When we just try to make one prompt that does all those things, it's too long. The model starts to get lost. It doesn't do all the things we want it to do. So we do prompt chaining. So we have one prompt that's looking at tone, one prompt that's looking at organization, and you can go from prompt to prompt and work through those. We also do the prompt injection, which is what it's called when you insert, for example, the question that they're working on and what that looks like. We also do, for when you're practicing something and it wants to recommend, you might watch a video or watch an article. Suggesting other links is a big place where these models hallucinate. And sure enough, it would just make up links to Khan Academy that don't exist if we left it on its own. So whenever it's recommending a link, it's actually using a database that it goes out and looks at, and we have a database with all of our videos and articles, and then it can find the one that's about that thing and pulls that actual name out and recommends that thing, so that we're getting actual links to actual content as it's recommending other things for students to do. So but again, the model is the same GPT-4 model that's available to everyone.
Cool. Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how we did the prompt engineering to get ChatGPT to act as a tutor, and also any recommended papers from Art Gracer to some of the principles you were trying to apply.
Sure. So I will find it right here. It'll probably come right up because I look for it so often. Collaborative dialogue patterns in naturalistic one-on-one tutoring. Gracer, Person, and Magliano, 1995, which is pretty old now, but they do a whole bunch. They basically looked at a whole bunch of natural tutoring methods of high school students tutoring 7th graders in algebra, and work through a whole bunch of what those techniques are. So this is one of the papers that we rely on quite a bit as we're training the models. And like I said, it really is a trial and error in terms of what we do. We kind of follow the pattern of first you describe who the tutor is. You are a Socratic tutor. We try to give it a little bit of the personality of Sal, which is not that you're the formal expert in the field, but you're like a friendly older cousin who is, gently guiding the student along their way. Then we give it a list of things to do. So those are some of the things that are from the research. We give it a list of things not to do. And so those are, some of those. And then we work through, we have some standard blocks of prompts that we use across our prompts, depending on how things are. We have one that's called the emoji fun block. And that's basically a little piece of text that tells it to, use emojis and be kind of whimsical and fun. We don't put that everywhere. It depends on, what the activity is, but that's one of them we use. We have a couple of other content blocks that just, frame the kinds of content that content principles we have at Khan Academy and how those work. So that's a little bit more color on some of the prompting.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you already mentioned the AI hallucinating when it comes to links. What are there other common things that it will hallucinate? Are we keeping track of that in any way?
So there's every time you put something into your question of are we keeping track? So every time it responds, you respond. Oh, let me get to a place so I can show you. Let's see. Let's go. So every time it gives a response, you can rate it with a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or you can leave feedback. If there was an issue, the response was good, general feedback. If there's an issue, you can select, it made a math mistake, it was inaccurate, it was unsafe, it was not helpful. All of this, we have a team of user researchers that are taking in and analyzing all of this information and looking at, where is it most likely to make math mistakes. I will tell you, the distributive property is really hard for whatever reason. It does not always multiply through. We've got 4 parentheses, 3 plus x close parentheses. It'll do the 4 times 3 and forget the 4 times x. So there's, things like that we have found that tend to be patterns that we see over and over. Certainly the links are bad. The citations, anytime it asks for citations, that's just not what large language models do, because large language models looking to predict the next words. And so it's just looking at what's the next likely word. It's not going out and searching for a complete citation and bringing that in. So anytime, we are pretty clear that you should not use large language models to do citations. You should be using other tools that actually are finding the actual citation and where things sit. So we know it's not great at that. And other than that, the more you get into specialized knowledge and very specific things about specialized knowledge, the more likely it is to make something up, and because it doesn't have enough data to get into that, to predict accurately what the next response is going to be.
Interesting. Yes.
I'm wondering what the rolling out this question of ChatGPT. When it first came out, there was some big news, and I was really excited to play around with it. But after that, it sort of died down. I'm just wondering what's the current progress and how's the schools or the kids using? Are they finding it useful? Is it rolling out the way you expect it to, or is it rolling out as fast as you want, or do you run into problems?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in that. So first is, as folks probably know, Khan Academy's mission is to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere. And we were not able to, and are still not able to, offer Conmigo, the Conmigo piece of this for free, because in fact, we have to pay for the OpenAI compute costs. I get an invoice every month from OpenAI. And so because of that, when we first rolled it out last spring, we were able, because of some agreements with OpenAI, to want to show the benefit of this for education. We had a couple of school districts we were able to give free access to, and a couple of schools that we were able to. So Newark, New Jersey, Hobart, Indiana. We targeted schools specifically that served high percentages of historically under-resourced students. So we're also thinking about how to get this into the hands of kids who normally wouldn't be able to have access to tools like this. And so last spring, we did not want to have a huge rollout and have 1 million students using it, because we didn't know how it was going to work. So we did a lot. We specifically targeted those schools. It was also available for folks if they wanted to pay $9 a month. You could get access as an individual to it. But in the schools, we then did a bunch of qualitative research. So we went in and observed students using it. We interviewed students and teachers and administrators, what's working, what's not working, and made a lot of adjustments, made some changes. Right now we have about, so this fall, we then wanted to expand a little bit bigger. We have right now about 30,000 students who are in schools using it. And again, that's been on purpose, that we're rolling it out to districts that are also willing to have their teachers go through some professional learning about AI and how to use AI, and being able to then introduce that to their classes in a responsible way. And one of the big groups, though, using it is the state of Indiana. The Secretary of Education in Indiana put out a request for proposals that allowed districts to apply for funding to use an AI-powered tutor. And about 25 districts applied for that. 20 of them chose Conmigo as their AI-powered tutor of choice. And so those 20 districts are all now onboarding onto Conmigo and where they are. So they're part of that 30,000 group. So we're being cautious as opposed to wanting to immediately go straight up, because this is new technology. We don't know, is this actually going to help students learn more? We think it is. We've based it on research about how people learn. We think these are solving learning problems, but we need to do that research and do that understanding. So we've got about 30,000 students in districts using it. We've got another about 30,000 independent users who are doing it. We actually just recently dropped the price down to $4 per month because of the drops. You saw probably OpenAI just dropped the cost of the for GPT-4 Turbo model. So we're able to, again, drop our costs as those compute costs come down. So we are happy with how it is. It's certainly not 1 million students learning it, but using it, but we're actually not trying to get to 1 million students yet.
Cool.
Hey. Yeah, is that Dennis? May I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear? Yeah. Okay. So I guess Sorry, first I have to admit that I haven't listened to the whole lecture. Just I treated this as event. I want to be here. But in terms of the I think you talk about the limitation about GPT, right? I mean, if sometimes when it go beyond its scope, it doesn't really differentiate knowledge or just model prediction. Sometimes it's just creating, right? I mean, I think we see this problem in real life. But do students have a capability or differentiate whether it's true knowledge or not, or I mean, what's your thinking about that? Could that be a real issue in certain subjects?
So,
and
I think in some cases, yes. And that's why we do things, for instance, but that's also the case with the internet. It's also the case with, let's be honest, teachers aren't 100% right all the time. And so what we are trying to get the students to do is to think critically about all kinds of information. I will say the class that I was in that really got this, the teacher made it a game to try to catch the model being wrong. And so the students were, doing their math, but always checking it and seeing like, oh, is this right? And if it did something wrong, the student would have their hand up and be like, I got it. This
Yeah.
And it just kind of like made that, like, put them in the right mindset to use this.
Yeah, I think when you compare with internet, I think there might be a good comparison, but obviously one can argue, people are losing critical thinking on the overuse of internet. But GPT, I think a good teacher, I mean, if they don't know, not sure, they should. I mean, hopefully they put a good teacher would put some error bar around his answer, right? So saying, I mean, this is what I think, this is my source. I mean, but I'm not 100% the positive. This is where I'm not positive about. But the GPT at times sounds much more confident, right? I mean, is that how you guys think about this kind of potential drawbacks, or how do you balance the capability versus versus the potential drawback? I mean, obviously, I would argue we already done the path with the internet, but
Yeah, it absolutely sounds confident. But again, we have to teach students to be critical thinkers. We've also put in, we think, a lot of guardrails, like on the math problems, where we give it the answer before, so it has the answer that it's working on. So it's far more likely to give the correct answer when it already has the answer. So that's part of the benefit of the way that we've specifically built this instantiation of the models, and we're not just using the raw model. We are including the things that are more likely to make it accurate. And it's still not 100%. And so again, that's why we want to make sure that students have the understanding of what the tool is that they're using.
Yeah, just to confirm, you haven't covered liberal arts subjects yet, right?
Covered what subjects?
Like liberal arts, writing, I mean, reading comprehension, those areas. Have you used GPT in those areas?
So in writing, the essay tutor, the give me feedback on this essay, if you paste in your essay to this section here, then, and you give it a grade level, pick a writing type and enter a little bit about the assignment, it will take your essay and give you feedback on your essay. Not about the facts in your essay, but about features of it, like its organization, those kinds of things, and how it works. So in those areas, we've found that it performs pretty well in terms of what it's doing. We are not asking it to, name dates that historical events happened or those kinds of facts in terms of what we do. But so, those are the places where it could potentially go wrong. But yeah.
Yeah. Lastly, I mean, I recently I happened to had some discussion with some ETS, some professor, like trying to developing learning models of students, particularly, they were thinking about the online environment. Khan Academy obviously probably have one of the best data set available over there. Have you, in terms of progress, you developing a sort of domain model of student learning in an online environment? What's the progress is you guys have so far? I mean, how does the AI GPT tool play into that big picture?
Yeah, so it comes back to that idea of a student model, a domain model, and a tutor model. So the tutor model is the large language model, GPT-4 or whatever models we're using that act like a tutor. The student model is what we understand about the student. And then the domain model for us is the relationship that we understand between skills. So we have a knowledge map that's based on, hey, if you know this skill, the probability that you know these other skills is this. If you don't know this skill, here are the prerequisite skills. So one of the projects we're working on now is actually feeding in that domain model so that Conmigo has access, and if a student is struggling on a skill, would be able to then look at that knowledge map and say, here are some prerequisite skills that we should see if the student has mastered yet, and help them build that foundation that they need to get this skill that they're struggling on. So that's definitely one of the pieces that's on our roadmap, is bringing that domain model knowledge to Conmigo.
To summarize,
I know that Moaz has had their hand up for quite a bit.
Let's shift to something else.
Very good.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the presentations. It was pretty cool. Yeah, the question I had was, I noticed you have the Tutor Me section and this whole Conmigo tutoring tool, and I was just wondering if you guys plan on using this tool for help tutoring and generating questions for like more standardized exams, because like, for example, like the SAT and the LSAT, because I noticed at least for standardized exams, one of the biggest problems is like a lot of publishers have different like difficulty based. Oh, so I guess you do difficulty based questions, and then the other thing is like I've noticed for standard exams it's sort of economically what do I say, it can get very expensive, and it helps a lot if you have tools out there, especially, and like it affects people with lower income classes more than, say, if you had the money for tutoring and all these practice books and stuff.
Yes, we totally agree. We actually have had SAT prep, LSAT prep for years before Conmigo. And so, and then, as you know, the SAT has recently switched to digital SAT. And so we have actually partnered with College Board. And so we had some early access to what the digital math and digital reading and writing would look for. And so you can see we have problems by skill level, so kind of foundations, and then medium skill level and advanced skill level. So if you go to any of these, you can engage, watch videos, read the articles, practice, and Conmigo would be here to help on these questions that you're trying to solve too, in terms of the SAT. So yes, but the questions themselves are all free, exactly for the reason you said, that we don't want being able to pay for your for test prep to be the differentiator for people of whether they get into college, graduate school, etc.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that has oh, yes.
I have one question.
The recent President Biden's executive order on AI safety, how is that impacting your rollout? Because you're going with ChatGPT, GPT-4, which I think the executive order kind of says, it's not as open as it should be. So why are you not going with the open source models, which kind of make more sense, from people having to visit?
So we are testing all the models that are out there. And for us, the first consideration is what models can we best steer? What are the steerabilities? What models follow our instructions and act like tutors the best? And OpenAI and GPT-4 has no comparison, well, with the exception we have not tested the Gemini models that were released yesterday. None of the open source models can compete with the results that we get from GPT-4 for the activities that we want to do. We are definitely looking for, how can we bring costs down? Certainly the open source ones would help with that. We're thinking about using, thinking how were these models trained? What do they look like? What do their training sets look like? All of those things. But because we are working to improve learning outcomes, our first criteria is what is the model that's going to most act like a tutor and be the most steerable, and that we can count on to be most following our safety directions that build those guardrails in. And for us right now, that's GPT-4. May not be in the future, and we'd love to see other models that are able to compete.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions myself. First question is, what has the reaction been from teachers and parents? That's one question. Second is the use of teaching of this for helping students learn how to read. You talked about writing. I'm wondering about comprehension, understanding, especially about vocabulary, that issue. And the third thing was a thought, as you're having ChatGPT show a solution, I'm wondering about maybe showing an incorrect solution and letting the student know that it's incorrect. Like, here's a proof that 1 = 0. What's wrong with this? Well, you divide, and you wanted to get the student to figure out you were dividing by 0 at this step, and you shouldn't do that. And that's what led to the wrong response. So I'm thinking about that in terms of getting the student to be engaged. So those are my questions.
Yeah, all good questions. And I appreciate the moderator's privilege of asking multiple questions. So in terms of response from teachers and parents, generally they have been quite interested in the ability in particular to help students get unstuck, whether they're at home doing their homework, parents who often are a little bit stuck themselves on their kids' math homework. I have used Khan Academy for a long time. They would go, let's go watch Sal's video together. But now have some place where they can come and work on, get answers to some specific problems and kind of work through them together. Teachers are happy to kind of have that support where they are. The other thing that teachers are really interested in is the ability to, many of them have classrooms where there are students at 7, 8 different levels of achievement, and they're trying to do things that hit all of them. And this can help differentiate some of that practice that's going on in their classrooms and be able to provide that support for things. So that's been good reactions to those. And then we're in early days, but that essay feedback we've gotten just in the past couple of days, some really nice teacher feedback that the kinds of feedback that Conmigo gives are really helpful for helping their students improve essays and to be better writers. So generally positive feedback. The biggest concerns we've heard, just to give the balanced view, district administrators, I talked about that moderation that gets emailed to teachers and parents. District administrators said, we want to get that email too for viability reasons. and want to, make sure that if there's things that are, hate and violence, that we're getting those things too. So we actually said we can build that in and create those messages to go to administrators as well. In the early days, setting some of those thresholds, teachers were saying, we're getting too many emails about issues that actually aren't a concern. This was fine that the student was saying this. And so we continued to work through some of those thresholds to find the right balance there. So those are some of the teacher reactions. In terms of teaching reading, so young readers, as we've seen with this whole, those of you who listen to the Sold a Story podcast or know about teaching reading, a lot of the beginning reading teaching is about understanding the sound symbol correspondence, understanding how letters make sounds and how groups of letters make different sounds. And to do that, you need a lot of the text to speech and speech to text technology that is just been released and is coming up. So we haven't done a lot of that level of reading instruction, but we have a Khan Kids app that's for 2 to 8-year-olds. And I think some of that may come into play with those younger readers and where they are. In terms of reading comprehension, I think there's a lot of possibility here. Traditionally, we assess reading comprehension in school with multiple choice questions, but what if you could have a conversation about the reading instead? And Conmigo could potentially, walk you through what's the main idea here, what's the evidence and the support of the argument, what's the strength of that evidence? I can imagine all kinds of things that we could do in terms of reading comprehension. Those have been conversations we've had internally, even over the past couple of weeks, about reading comprehension and what that might look like. So stay tuned on reading and what that could be. And then in terms of doing things a little bit differently on incorrect solution. So the example you gave of a proof that's wrong and finding out where it's wrong, our human authors of content write questions like that are in our courses. And so Conmigo could potentially do some of, walk as students are trying to figure out those questions that are already in our courses like that, could play a role there as well. The idea of right now, we don't have Conmigo really generating lots of questions. We have our content creators are using these tools to also create questions that they then, as humans, check and then put into or add into our question banks. But at this point, most of what we're doing, the Conmigo is not generating lots of questions on its own yet, because we don't always trust it to get the right answer. But as we do, I think that's an interesting, those kinds of questions are certainly good learning options as opposed to just giving the answers.
Great. This was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for giving a talk to our group.
Yes, it was my pleasure.